Welcome to 101, a podcast for young women interested in careers in film and TV.
We'll sit down with industry professionals, ask them your questions, and get the answers you need to know.
101. It's a beginning.
We are here with a brand new episode. We have Alex Creswick here. Hi, how are you?
Hello, I am doing good. How are you?
We're good. We're really excited to have this guest on this week. They are an intimacy coordinator as well as a producer. We met on a job at Blizzard. So we are currently both working at Blizzard right now.
If you could just tell everybody what Blizzard is, because I'm sure that they would want to know, and maybe we can have another show on what, that type of work that you guys are doing right now.
It's a large conglomerate company, Activision Blizzard King. We're actually currently getting bought up by Microsoft, but we make games such as World of Warcraft, Diablo, Hearthstone, Call of Duty. Alex and I are working on Diablo, so that is our main jam.
Awesome.
So if anybody's interested in game production or game design or the exteriors of being a part of the game industry, let us know.
I think that would be a really cool episode, actually. Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about one of the many hats that I've worn in this industry.
It's a familiar tale, wearing many hats, but I think one of your roles that you do is particularly interesting because I've never talked to anyone who does this role. So what do you do?
So in this respect, I am a trained intimacy coordinator. I am basically a stunt coordinator for intimate or exposed scenes. And there has been a lot of conversation, and we can have a very extensive conversation simply on what intimacy even means, especially in the context of a work environment. And that is something that this is a very new job just in general, and we're kind of establishing best practices and starting those conversations in the film industry about what is intimacy, raising awareness of things like there are a lot of child actors who had their first kisses at work on screen for millions of people to see, and that inevitably leaves an effect on you, but also who was having those conversations with them about the impact of that, what that means, how they're feeling in that moment. A lot of people don't realize quite how broad the title of intimacy coordinator can kind of cover in subject matter.
It's such an important job. I started out as an actor, and no one talked to me about this, and I found that I would have to have conversations with other actors like, okay, well, what are you comfortable with? This is what I'm comfortable with. And having someone like you championing for everyone to be at ease and to be on the same page, I just think it's amazing. So do you want to jump into like the basics?
Well, intimacy coordination is for sets. It is for things that are in active production, though almost every intimacy coordinator you meet is available for consultation for scripting, which is another conversation people are trying to advance. So this really does need to start in the writer's room with fair consideration of what that nudity means to your characters, to the story you're trying to tell, to your audience, because we can want to do a lot of things as artists that we can't control how people respond or decide to ingest art. And so that care and consideration of, okay, exactly what are we seeing? Exactly what do we want to convey? Let's make sure that we aren't replicating the issues that we're trying to talk about with our art, but then just piling it on. That is the activity that goes behind being an intimacy coordinator or any of these kind of roles, which is why a lot of intimacy coordinators also are doing other things kind of related, but not necessarily in the entertainment field. So you have a lot of people who are teaching like kink stuff, like professional BDSM folk, professional sex workers, some therapists. Usually people are doing something adjacent to, for me, it was sensitivity reading. Mm-hmm. I come from a development and producing background from the financing side of things. And so when I was going through development, people were really quick to be like, oh, you have a really specific sensibility for like problematic things that are going to make the internet come at us with pitchforks. And so for me, intimacy coordinating is just a very natural continuation of that practice, just like everyone else I love talking to intimacy coordinators and a lot of them because you get so many different points of view. But the common thread is nobody is really embarrassed about sex at all or sexuality in a really kind of wholesome way, because you can talk about things without it getting creepy, which, as people who are femme-bodied moving for the world, that's very rare that you can just find this like joyous space to do that. And we try and bring that attitude to sets. Your first call is you read the script, you get hired onto your job or whatever. Your first talk is with, depending on how productions want to do it, but usually your director. And your director is really going to shape how you end up working, because you are there to facilitate view of the director in as safe a way as possible. And so what we're really doing is turning around to the director, hearing what the director wants, talking to the actors, and then turning around to the director and go, okay, here's your sandbox. Here's, the very boundaries of where you can go. As long as you're staying inside of here, everyone's going to be great. And when you do that, it's really freeing to the creative process, because I've got all of this real estate in here to just do whatever. Everyone's on the same page, gung-ho. It really does enhance the creative process. It makes shoot times faster, speeds things up. For film, replicability is a really big one. If you can keep that scene consistent from frame to frame. And then just your actor burnout. You've got your actors in a safe place with each other, with the set. If anything goes wrong, we have like a signal, which sometimes is just calling the intimacy coordinator over to be like, I need a break. It's really a facilitation of the director's vision. So the director can kind of dictate how involved they need you to be in that. There are some directors who have just wholesale handed the shoots over essentially to intimacy coordinators. And there are some intimacy coordinators who have businesses essentially being second unit directors for sex scenes. Some directors are just not comfortable with that and just really want you there to draw that sandbox and then step aside and let it play out, which all of that is great. A lot of people think that intimacy coordinators or people in that kind of position are going to come in and just be kind of dictatorial and draw up very hard boundaries. We want you to let you know where the boundaries are so that you can have that flexibility within them. Some of it is just checking in, like, have you worked with an intimacy coordinator before? How was that for you? Is there anything you learned from the process that we can use? Because it's ultimately about communication, making people comfortable, empowering people to make really cool, fun, creative choices in a safe position. So you take that kind of ask from the director and you can figure out, if I'm talking to an A-list movie actor, there's a different power balance of me saying the director would like versus going to a day player who's here for one day and doing, a quick hookup scene with the main actor or something. So you kind of get that sense of what you can ask, how it should be asked, how you need to ameliorate those power dynamics in your ask to get a real yes or no. Because ultimately what we're also trying to do is create a world where yes and no are both equally valid and important pieces of information that we're going to respond to and create art with.
I like that idea of yes and no being okay. Just coming from a background of being an actor, I can remember being a young actress being asked to do things that I was not comfortable with, and I said no. And then I felt guilty about putting those boundaries out for myself where, I felt safe, and, knowing that working with someone like you, it's not, you don't have to feel guilty about saying this is not something I'm comfortable with, so that's not on the table. I think that's such an important lesson in life. I think it's such an important lesson with work and art. I think that's so cool. How did you get started in the industry? How did you know that you wanted to be in this industry?
It's actually my mom's fault. She really, really wanted me to go to grad school after college. I wanted to take a couple of years off because I was very burned out from school. So we compromised by me saying, look, if you just ask me what I want to do, I would be like, I want to go make movies. So I will apply to film school, grad schools. And if I get in, I'll go. And if not, you're going to leave me alone. And I'm going to take however much time I need to take to figure out what I want to do with my life. And then UCLA let me in, and I was like, well, I guess the joke's on you, Mom, because I'm from South Carolina. So I just moved directly across the country. And she was like, oh no, I think you're never coming back. And I was like, there's a high probability that that is a true statement that you have just said. I went to UCLA, did the producers program. It got me out here. And then I started working for a guy named John Patak, and he worked out of a management company called Entitled Entertainment. So I got my management training without actually having to work as a manager, which was simultaneously genius, but very hard to explain on a resume. And then I just kind of worked my way up in production companies to CE and then DOD, and then I was a VP. And I got to a point where I was just very unhappy having to work on other people's movies, like movies that were not necessarily to my taste, or movies that I would read and be like, yo, we shouldn't be doing this. Like, went on my own, and then the pandemic happened. And so I had just been sort of building my business as a sensitivity reader, as a kind of VP of development for hire on the script side of things. And intimacy coordinating was always something I'd been very interested in, because it's like practical applications of everything I was doing in the sensitivity reading and as a producer. Like, I don't stop. This kind of aspect of me doesn't stop just because I'm producing. I carry the ethos and the praxis into producing, but there are certain power dynamics that you can't ameliorate certain aspects of producing. So it means something more if I ask you as an actor a question as a producer than as an intimacy coordinator. And part of my practice as a producer is empowering actors to give that person that they can say no to, that they feel comfortable being real about their boundaries, because sometimes you as an actor might even want to tell me why you have this boundary just so that I know, but you don't owe your coworkers that. You don't even owe me that information, but you don't owe your coworkers an explanation for the why. But it can be helpful to have somebody who has that context in case a situation starts escalating towards okay, I know automatically this is going to be a no-go, and I can just, hey, we need to go a different direction with this, however I'm capable of doing that. It's my job as a producer to be sensitive to that stuff. It's my job to make sure that my director is being sensitive to that and not just getting trapped in their own vision. This is a team sport and a team effort, and keeping everyone safe should be a team effort and not just left up to the intimacy coordinator. But, we're going to be a really powerful force for starting that conversation and that change.
It's so refreshing to hear, because I think that there's such an atmosphere of fear when you're working on a job. Fear, you don't want to cause trouble. You don't want people to fire you. You don't want to make waves and then have repercussions. So I think all of these insights are just so helpful, and it shows that there's tremendous progress being made for many people in this industry.
Well, this industry does hate a no in many ways.
Oh man, everybody knows that one.
Yeah. Well, I just hope that, more directors are hiring intimacy coordinators. I don't know if it's up to them at the end of the day, but I like the idea of bringing you guys on even earlier in the script writing process, because that's where the relationships are created. That's how the body language is created,
right,
from that person's persona and what the writer has created for that character. It's huge to bring them on earlier.
Ultimately, what it will take is us actually stopping looking at the way we do the entire industry, because you can't fix something that is built on a fundamentally flawed foundation. And the foundation of Hollywood is built on, quite literally, the bones of many people. And so intimacy coordinators can't fix things, but we can try and make people safer as we go forward. And
once you're brought on set, what would your day-to-day responsibilities sort of look like?
So every intimacy coordinator will need a prep day. That's really non-negotiable, because you just need at least a day or 8 hours, or however you can finagle it for your project, to have those conversations with your director, your cast. Some roles you don't necessarily need a prep day for, but if you're talking budgeting and things like that, at least a 2-day process. So you would have those conversations. If there's going to be a rehearsal that's not same day and date, the intimacy coordinator would show up for the rehearsal and really help you get into the blocking. Then we would show up, whatever the call sheet says on set, check in with the actor, check in with any department heads, because depending, like, sometimes you get roped into conversations with costume or makeup if you're special effects or prosthetics, whoever's handling that stuff. Intimacy coordinators have a kit that includes anything from strapless thongs to mint and gum and fidget toys. Even as a producer, if I have harrowing scenes, I always like to ask my actors, like, hey, you're gonna potentially be in a real bad headspace after this. Can I get you a blanket? Can I get you tea? Anything, like your intimacy coordinator could have that. Sometimes we'll bring the robe for scenes. It really depends. Like, every intimacy coordinator is going to be different, and every set and person is going to have a different kind of need. But yeah, I always kind of ask, is there anything, do you want help transitioning out of that headspace? Do you want me to just put you in a room for 30 minutes and make sure no one bothers you for that time? Like, we're really trying to just be responsive to what your actor needs in a way that, like, if you say I need 30 minutes to decompress, I can turn around and tell the first AD, hey, are you aware that the actor will need 30 minutes to decompress, especially if we're shooting that scene in the morning and we're rolling into other scenes later on. Like, this is kind of how that we, as, tools to the production, can forewarn you, tell you how to, make sure that that's going forward, keep the machine rolling. We're here to be collaborators and just to make sure that, everything keeps moving in a way that is respectful to everyone on set. There's no one cookie cutter size to this job. And that's part of what makes it so hard. And that's another reason why I think a good earmark of an intimacy coordinator is somebody who's doing other work outside of this, where those skills are in use as well. We are responsible for the closed set procedures. So we will make sure, only the necessary people are on set, that there are no monitors outside of set, nobody's taking pictures, all of that jazz. We'll help with any paperwork that might be needed for that kind of thing with SAG. And then we are on hand to make sure that the actors are comfortable. If there is any actual nudity, we're responsible for the robe, so we'll be on standby. SAG protocols are arranged so that actors spend the least time overtly nude as possible. So, like, you wait until you're ready for the steady, ready, go. So you take your robe off and then action, that kind of stuff. There are a number of stories where certain actors have been like, well, I'm like a method actor and I'm fine being naked. And sometimes we have a conversation of, right, but your crew isn't necessarily fine with you being naked. Like, they have not consented to you and your method acting wandering around the set. And usually when you can kind of reframe that, it's like, okay, I understand why I will now wear a robe, but I'm gonna let it gape down to my navel. And you're like, great, I'm glad for you.
Compromise.
Go for it. Just make sure that waist part is tight, please.
Oh, method actors. What did you study in school?
In my undergrad, a communication major that was self-engineer a film degree at an institution that did not have one at the time, but had a number of film classes. And then I did the producers program at UCLA. Always been very into story, that I have a very story brain, and I like film and TV in particular because it's multi-forms of storytelling coming together to tell a single story. You've got the actual narrative of what's going on, you've got the visuals of it, but then every element also tells a story. So, the costumes, the way people talk, the way it's cut, you can change everything. You can really change what something says on paper just by an image.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just wildly fun to my brain.
How was the program at UCLA?
The UCLA Producers Program is a 2-year MFA professional program. So most of the classes are from 7 to 11 at night. They facilitate internships. Your thesis as a producer is going through the kind of in your head development process and almost prepping for pre-production of a feature. And then the top 3 pitch at the producers marketplace, and you also have to shoot a short film by the time you graduate. It got me out here. It gave me a decent basis for the industry because I'm not the kind of person who would just be like, well, moving to Los Angeles, everybody. I would need a reason to come out here, some driving force, and the school was it. And it gave me a community of people. It was my in to the film industry. in a lot of ways.
If you can describe your first gig as an intimacy coordinator on set and what it was like, anything like eye-opening or shocking or like things that you didn't expect, things that you learned.
Yeah, so I did a series of really small, intimate portraits, like 2 minutes or so of each, and they were just supposed to be, they were all scenes that had an intimate component to them. And it was just so interesting. We ended up working with 6 different actors. We had one actor who was like totally down, was a sex educator in her own right, and she was like, "Look, I can't stand mint." I was like, "What?" She's like, "I can't stand any mint, and I can't stand most breath fresheners." And I was like, okay. And she's like, "Great. So you can ask my partner, actually, can I just supply an approved like breath freshener mint thing?" And I was like, Absolutely you can. Like, I've talked to your scene partner and they are like just delighted to be here and a delight. And I'm sure they're going to think that this is one of like the funniest in like a great way kind of a things." And yeah, those two had such good chemistry together, like very much matching vibes, very well cast. But yeah, that was something that just like, oh, first time out, that's so interesting. But seeing, so one of the other scenes that we ended up doing, that was like a very joyous, bubbly, dorks in love kind of a vibe of a scene, juxtaposed with one of the earlier scenes we did, which was a hookup that gets very coercive and borders on physical, but the person like, I'm not doing this, and leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And we rehearsed the way all the way through, just barely touching, just going through the motions and watching the actors start reflecting the like language and the way we were setting up the conversation and the checks, and they started doing it themselves to the point where everyone could kind of like, the director could just start giving some notes and they could work through it themselves.
Nice.
So then that point, I'm like, as an intimacy coordinator, you're sitting there like, oh, this is fantastic. Like they know exactly where they're about. They start checking in with each other to make sure, I can touch you here. Let's just walk through it.
Aww.
And it ended up being an incredibly powerful scene that was like really tough. But both of them, like at the end, they were like, yeah, like that could have been really harrowing, but we turned it into a really good, healthy, creative exploration on set. And just like and we shot it so quickly, and we were all shocked. We were like, we thought that had been hours, but we shot it out in I think 2 hours, and we had blocked off the entire morning to shoot the whole thing.
Wow, that AD is very happy.
Yeah, it was. It was really cool to watch though, and to see like, oh, you're actually doing it. Like all of this came together. We watched it in action and it worked.
That's a testament to you though, for like doing your job so well that they learned so quickly, how to communicate with one another right there in front of the camera. You were definitely needed.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Cool first gig. I love first gig stories. I think that's like my favorite thing to ask people. So what is the best part of your job?
I think it is that moment where you see it kind of click, when you see people starting to come together, get into that groove, trust each other, trust the process, find the character. Because one of the things that I love just about the film industry is you can you can have this really cool base, and then somebody's going to do something that you never would have thought of. And then your brain is just like, oh, if that, then all of these other things. And I just love, like, you can't. This is why whenever anyone's like, oh, tour and movies, I'm like, that is not a thing. Like, it just is just not a thing. It's so collaborative. And I just think it's at its best when everybody given ownership of their aspect of it, and everything comes together in this cool collaborative thing that everybody is like, we did this together.
What would be the most difficult for this type of role?
There are people who are very threatened by the role, because you are, in some ways, we make a lot about the director and how it's their vision, and actors are taught to like try and give the director what they want. And intimacy coordinators are somebody who stands in between that direct conversation and is a little bit of a filter. So there's a lot of anxiety about that. And I understand it, because like you said earlier, this is an industry built on fear. And part of that fear is saying no, because once you get to the place where people are saying yes to you, you don't want to hear no again. And again, there's that thought that we are sitting there, and I always use the, like, I'm not Gandalf sitting there looking at you like you're the Balrog being like, you shall not pass. I don't think that's not effective. That's also just not my vibe. Like if I'm telling you no, just straight out, people are usually like, oh, okay, why? Like this seems like very serious that you're just being like, no, we're absolutely not doing this. And usually I tell you a story that is simultaneously entertaining and horrifying about why the answer is no. We are interrupting the way that things are being done, and there is a measure of fear to that. You hear all of these stories, like I've been in the industry long enough that the really underpinning of a lot of success stories and unexpected success stories are someone told me no, and I was just like, okay, I'm gonna go somewhere else. My business is not impacted by your no, other than we're not making this together. Being told no and like standing firm in your creative sensibility, people do actually respond to it. Sometimes not like to the point where they're like, oh, no, come back, we're gonna fight. But it sticks with people, and it changes the conversation in the future. It's a lot of still education of how do you work with an intimacy coordinator? Like for directors, how do I define how the intimacy coordinator, what the intimacy coordinator is going to talk to my actors about? Like I want to be the first person to talk to them about X, Y, or Z. And so I try to always go in being like we'll work on this together. I want to, again, not interrupt your thing, but like I might have to have a conversation about this person about just these things, but I'm not going to talk to them in the sense of character. I will make sure to stay far away from character, and I will, check in with you to make sure that's what I'm doing. One of the reasons that SAG hasn't really moved to make a final decision as to whether this role will fall under SAG is from my understanding that they can't mandate every production have an intimacy coordinator because they're not enough. I think that's a question we have to start asking ourselves as like a community, is how are we, training the next round of intimacy coordinators, and to look at ourselves and ask ourselves, what are the voices that we don't have here yet? And how can we start bringing them in?
Yeah.
Usually after a little bit, when people give into the process, they're like, oh, okay, I see.
I love this theme that's running throughout the conversation with you of like establishing boundaries. Just, it's okay to put boundaries out there, whether you're, working on an intimate scene, whether, whatever the situation. It's just something that I noticed about you. And I think it's such an important thing for our listeners to know that it's okay to have boundaries. I think it flows really nicely into the next question, which is a question that Meredith and I think is so important for young people, young women, to be able to talk about pay and what their rates are and what they are comfortable with as far as being compensated fairly for their work. And I was hoping that you might be able to touch a little on what the average rate is for an intimacy coordinator starting out as you progress through a career. If you could touch on that a little bit, I think it would be really helpful for our listeners.
I think the current rate is on par with what you would pay scale for a stunt coordinator for SAG. And I believe that is $1,085 or $86 a day. Up to, I think some of the top intimacy coordinators, depending on the project, can probably command anywhere between a $3,000 to $5,000 rate, though at that point you would probably put them on a weekly flat rate plus a kit fee. When you get into those smaller budgets, again, you want to treat this like a stunt coordinator. Think of it in the same way you don't skimp on your stunt coordinator, because you could have serious physical harm up to including death. Here you could leave somebody with serious trauma. The thing I'll flag for anybody who's like thinking about being an intimacy coordinator is this work is very sporadic, like any other kind of set job. It can be a very feast or famine sort of situation, depending on where you're located. You might not, get jobs for a little bit, and it can be a little hard to break into because we don't have we don't even have a formalized way of getting in necessarily.
Can you shadow an intimacy coordinator, or is that not really allowed because the sets are kind of a closed situation?
So that's one of the big kind of hurdles, is how do you get that practical experience? But yeah, there is that desire, and I think that need for shadowing. But like you said, it is, closed sets, and most people don't have budgets for like an assistant or an associate.
So many roles in this industry should have sort of an apprenticeship.
Well, that's part of like the hard time I've had kind of generalizing solutions to problems or stuff. Like that's the problem of creating a check these things off and you are certified to be an intimacy coordinator, because it's like there's so much that you can't really test for, you know.
Yeah.
Especially to this job, there's so many moving parts and everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses and their own unique way of approaching a problem, and some things aren't a problem for certain people and will never be a problem for certain people. And like that awareness, it's these kind of jobs that are truly disruptive to the process kind of in some ways belie easy categorization. Like one of the reasons that people, I feel like, feel very comfortable with me and take me at my word when I tell you, like, yeah, tell me no, and I'm like, that's an excellent piece of information, is because I'm holding my own boundaries as it pertains to other people. So like as a producer, I'm just not going to ask you to do a handful of things, even if we are friends. While we have that producer relationship, I am very aware of my relative sense of power. So I am simply not going to put you in the position to have to tell me, you know, no as my employee for something that like you might even think, oh, well, what if I get fired, or what if I'm seen as too whatever. Like, nope, if that's the issue here, then somebody else needs to make that ask if it's within like a purview of something you can do. And that idea is intrinsic to like how people move through the world, how they are aware of their own privilege, of how the world is different with them versus other people. And we're really not taught to do that in our society in like a really meaningful and intentional way, where you stop and like no is an option for you as well. Like, I think that aging personally for me is that just razor defined sense of how I move through the world and how curated my impact on that world. Like, to me, that is adulthood, not this like grow up, get married, have a bunch of kids, get a house, do all the like, no, what is the impact that I am leaving on the world? As I become more of an adult, that should get more and more specific. My razors should align to carve out like the perfect hole for me, and that shouldn't conflict with anyone else's razors, because their razors should be aligned to make room for me and mine, if that makes sense.
What do you think needs to change in this industry?
Everything. I feel like the goal should be to build the things that work in a way that just will replace the things that don't work. Like, nothing in the film industry happened accidentally, and it's not kept that way accidentally either. It will take everybody stopping and being like, we want to make this without any aspect of this process being abusive. But that means like really fundamental change, from us reconsidering, you know, base rates for people, to reconsidering how we compensate crew. What does success look like? We are still really stuck in the idea of box office success. Who made the most money? Well, I mean, who did make the most money if one of the projects cost $500 million and made $100 million at the box office? Like, that money alone seems like a very substandard metric of success that only services one kind of an interest.
Yeah. It's also like, you know, how do we make below the line employees feel not as disposable as we do feel? You know, and that all comes from the top down.
Yeah, the answer is all of it should change. I don't feel like that's a helpful answer for most people.
I think it is a helpful answer. Are you kidding me? I think more people should be saying everything should change.
Right. You have to be willing to give up. And that's that idea that you have to be willing to give up the power that you are being given to empower other people to stand beside you.
What's the best advice you've gotten, or the best advice that you would give to our listeners?
I think one of the earliest pieces of advice I was given, to be very aware of your own credibility. And as an extension of that, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. Realizing that you do lend people credibility simply by being in a space with them, by engaging with them, engaging with their work as to yours. How do you comport yourself in all situations? Because like, you're never going to be perfect. One of the reasons the industry is so desperate for authenticity is that a lot of people don't have their own. My best advice that I think I would give somebody at this point in my life is invest in the project of yourself before all other things. Because, you know, again, we're back to that whole credibility thing, but like, investment in yourself is never not going to be worth it. It isn't. Like, you're a 1 in a billion existence, which is really cool to think about. Build your network around you, ideally with other people who are investing in themselves, because it makes the conversations much easier to have when other people are going through that journey with you.
Are there any directors or any films that have inspired you, that have influenced your work? Do you have a favorite? Divulge.
Yes, I will take you through my tour of
Yay.
things that I love. The thing that I love most, and that I think everybody should absolutely watch immediately, is the CBS show Zoo. Just incredible. I watched it in live time, and every year that they were like, it's getting another season, I was like, no way are you giving me another season of this utterly perfect show. I've seen it about 12 times, can barely tell you a single plot point. Love it. Go watch Zoo. Film version of that, I would say, is Magic Mike XXL. Similarly, I watched that, astonished that it exists, constantly astonished. Just an incredible piece of cinema meant for men that doesn't hate women. Didn't know it actually happened, but there we have Magic Mike XXL for anybody to watch.
Is that the last installment of that?
No.
Oh, that's the first one?
We didn't talk about the first one, and now we're not going to talk about the third one either.
Okay,
We're just going to
so
let Magic Mike XXL exist in its own, like,
cool
pantheon of incredibly important
I gotta see it.
texts.
Yeah. Okay.
Watch it and then go read a article by Helena Fitzgerald called Magic Mike XXL is just the Odyssey, but with butts. When I watched that movie, my friend took me to it, and we ended up holding hands across the lap of a straight man who was having an absolute meltdown because he was like, I don't understand how this movie is so good and so accurate to my experience as a non-shitty man with a non-shitty male friend group. And she and I would just reach out, and she would be there, and I would turn and look at her, and she'd be like, yeah, it gets better. And I was like, no way. I am literally astonished that movie exists. Every time I watch it, I literally am just sitting here like,
Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. We had a blast talking to you and learned a ton. We're grateful for what you do for our industry and creating the space that is safe for everyone to work and empowering people to have boundaries and to have a really positive outlook on having those boundaries.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a delight to let me just sit here and be nerdy about consent praxis.
We loved every second of it. Thanks for everything you taught our listeners and more.
Well, that about does it for us. Thanks so much to our amazing guests, and thanks to you, our amazing listeners. What do you want to learn next? We want to hear. Send us a note.
Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, all at 101 Podcast.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.